Chapter 67, The Massacre of Hallberg, 2. Bang! What? Breaking the nightstand with my fist, I hastily looked through the contents of the book. Flipping through the pages of the book, I quickly looked for anything that could give me a clue about what had happened to Jean, but it was to no avail as the book stopped right after Jin's death. What was happening? Jean, one of the main protagonists, died? Impossible. Hastily taking out a pen, I tried everything I could to change the outcome of what was written in the book, but it was all futile as every 5 seconds the changes I made disappeared. Damn it! Clenching my jaw and fists hard, I closed the book and let out a long breath. I needed to stay calm. I couldn't panic. Jin's death would be devastating to the plotline. He was instrumental in helping Kevin grow both as a person and as a hero. His death would have a huge effect on the plotline. I couldn't let him die. Closing my eyes, I made my mind up and headed towards the exit of my room. Whatever caused Jin's death, I had to stop it at all costs. If I allowed Jean to die, what was the point of letting all of this massacre happen? Didn't I turn a blind eye to this so that the plotline could continue? What was the point of me not interfering if things didn't go as the plotline dictated? Gulp. Gulp. Downing a couple of potions to recover my stamina and mana, I put the book in the insides of my blazer and left the room. I didn't have much time. Considering the effects of the book, I had less than 10 minutes to alter the future in which Jean was destined to die. Realistically, I had 5 minutes, since 10 minutes was the time that Kevin and the others found Jin's dead body. Reactivating Monarch's indifference, I opened the door and made my way towards Jin's room. I had one goal, and one goal only. Preventing Jin's death. Surrounded by multiple black-clad individuals, Jin's figure deftly and skillfully moved around them. It was almost as if he was a ghost. His figure would melt with the shadows and reappear behind any one of the black-clad individuals, catching them by surprise. Swish! Appearing behind one of the black-clad individuals, Jean swung his dagger towards the back of his head. As he swung, the image of the dagger blurred as it coursed through the air in a lightning-fast manner. It was so fast that the afterimage of the dagger lingered in the air for a split second. Clank! Clank! KKHHH, damn it! As if predicting Jin's attack, quickly turning around and parrying Jin's surprise attack, 2 black-clad individuals appeared next to Jean and attacked him from both his right and left flank. Ducking down and dodging the 2 attacks, Jean dashed forward and slid between the 2 black-clad individuals. Slash! Slit! As he slid, 2 deep cuts appeared on the 2 black-clad individuals' calves as Jean made sure to cut their legs in order to hinder their movements. Stumbling a couple of steps due to the cuts on their legs, the other black-clad individual, who Jean tried to ambush, stabbed his sword downwards. Roll. Rolling to the side to avoid the sword, Jean tensed his core and with the aid of his back jumped up in the air. Clank! Clank! Whilst in the air, Jean forcefully twisted his body and spun like a wheel as he parried all the attacks that came from all sides. Thud! Huff, huff, huff. Landing on the ground, Jean heavily panted for air as he wiped the sweat that had started accumulating on his forehead. Looking at the 5 individuals before him, Jin's face became grim. Despite being stronger than them, it somehow felt as if he was fighting against an insatiable beast. No matter how much Jean tried, the black-clad individuals he was fighting would quickly respond to his attacks and counter them with an even more fearsome combo. It was to the point that his breathing started to become heavier and heavier by the second. From the way he saw things, the most he could last would be 5 more minutes. Any longer than that and he would be too exhausted to move. Gulp! Frowning, Jean took out a couple of potions from his storage dimension and quickly downed them. Though he could replenish his stamina and mana with potions, because he didn't expect such a situation to arise, he only had a couple of stamina and mana recovering potions with him. Therefore, despite the fact that he had potions, they could at most only help him fight for a bit longer. They really weren't a solution for his current predicament. Clank! Clank! Parrying the attacks coming from the black-clad individuals, Jin's mind raced as he looked for a solution. Looking at his room, which had now become a mess, Jin frantically looked for anything that could aid his escape. Looking around and seeing nothing, Jin clenched his teeth and looked at his skill section on his status window. Status . Name, Jin Horton. Rank, E. Strength, E. Agility, E+. Stamina, E. Intelligence, E. Mana capacity, E. Luck, E. Charm. Plus. Profession. Assassin LVL.3. Martial Manual. Shadow Harvester, Greater Realm of Mastery. Dagger art primarily focused on lightning-fast attacks that slice through the air at astonishing speeds. The greater the mastery, the faster each swing becomes, making each attack harder to defend against. Void Link, Minor Realm of Mastery. Movement art that enables user to momentarily move between shadows. The greater the mastery, the longer the user can travel between shadows. Speed of user inside of shadow is tripled, and when exiting the shadow, user speed will be considerably boosted for a couple of seconds. Skills. E. A mana conglomeration. A skill that enables user to gather all of their mana into a singular point and letting it explode in one swift attack that multiplies the attack power of the attack by a factor of 10. F. A light eye. A skill that stimulates the neurons located in the eyes, enabling the user to enhance their vision. From being able to see further away, to being able to see at night and being able to slow down the world around him. Light eye enables user to enhance ocular functions. Damn it. If only he had more skills. Despite the fact that he had access to a lot of skills thanks to his family, he was only allowed to choose 2. Any more than that and the elders within the family would start complaining as skills were limited and the demand was high. The reason he chose those 2 skills was because it best suited his profession, assassin. And precisely because his profession was assassin that he was currently in a bind. His profession specialized in stealthily killing his enemies from behind, not fighting against them head-on. That was not something he specialized in. Currently, he was using Light Eye, and despite the fact that everything around him was slower, he could barely hold on. That was not something he specialized in. Currently, he was using Light Eye, and despite the fact that everything around him was slower, he could barely hold on. This was especially so because his mana consumption was at an all-time high. If not for the few potions he had on him, he would have already long lost by now. Looking at mana conglomeration, Jin hesitated. This skill, although devastating, would force him to consume all of his remaining mana. Meaning that if he didn't kill them, he was done for. What made things worse for Jin was that he no longer had any mana recovering potions on him, meaning that this option was only for when he was on the verge of death. Clank! Swoosh! Parrying one of the black-clad individual's attacks, Jin ducked and avoided another attack coming from behind him. Jumping backward, Jin continued ducking and defending against the black-clad individuals. KHHH. The more he fought, the more tired Jin became. Looking towards the entrance of his apartment, Jin slowly moved in that direction. He needed to escape. He couldn't defeat them. He had to survive. He was the future of the Horton family. He couldn't die. Not when a lot of people had expectations on him. Making his way towards the door, Jin continued to struggle against the continuous attacks from the black-clad individuals. He had to live. He wanted to leave. Halfway through his way towards the exit of the room, Gene paused. Wasn't he just running away? He, Gene Horton, who had been trained since young with the best facilities and potions, was actually thinking of escaping? Did his talent only amount to this much? Thinking about Kevin and Amanda, the strength of Gene's grip on his dagger increased. Ever since coming to the lock, Gene has only been facing setbacks after setbacks. He lost his first place to both Melissa and Kevin, which was a huge blow to his pride. Though he was angry about it, this setback fueled his desire to grow and become stronger to claim back the spot of number one. He desired, no, he craved to be at the top. Then, just as he felt he was becoming closer to his goal, news of Amanda killing a ranked villain spread across the academy. A seemingly impossible task that no matter how many preparations Gene made, he couldn't accomplish, happened. This setback hurt him even more, as now there was another person who was above him. Moreover, it was from someone that he had been compared to ever since young. Amanda Stern, daughter of his rivaling guild, Demon Hunter. From that point, Gene felt as if the world was laughing at him. Wasn't he supposed to be the once-in-a-lifetime prodigy from the Horton family? How could he lose to an orphan and a couple of girls? Was it all just hype? Ah! Screaming at the top of his lungs, Gene's bloodshot eyes directly stared at the black-clad individuals before him. There's no way I am weaker to the likes of Amanda and Kevin. Lunging forward, Gene's attacks became more intense and brutal. He discarded all forms of defense and just wildly swung his daggers. He swung and swung and swung his daggers, almost as if he went mad. Clank! 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 No matter how many cuts appeared on his body, Gene ignored the pain and continued attacking. I am better than them. Turning his attention towards one of the black-clad individuals, Gene threw one of his daggers in his direction. Swoosh! As Gene threw the dagger, a whistle arose. Splitting the air, the dagger instantly appeared before the black-clad individual. Clank! Barely managing to block Gene's dagger, the black-clad individual took a couple of steps back. Spurt! Appearing behind the black-clad individual, Gene stabbed his straight into the throat, killing him instantly. Without looking back, Gene picked up his dagger and once again threw it at the nearest black-clad individual. Swoosh! Spurt! This time, the dagger hit the black-clad individual in the head, killing him instantly. It was evident that he was inferior to the black-clad individual he just killed. Turning his attention back towards the remaining three black-clad individuals, Gene took advantage of the fact that their formation was a mess to once again dash in the direction. Melting into the shadows, Gene disappeared from the view of the black-clad individuals. Huddling up together, with their back against each other, the three black-clad individuals waited for Gene to appear. Swoosh! Hearing a swooshing sound next to them, the trio simultaneously turned in the direction of where the sound came from and stabbed in that direction. Clank! Clashing against a hard object, pieces of wood scattered everywhere as a broken lamp appeared in their view. Gotcha! Appearing behind one of the black-clad individuals, Gene's dagger split the air as it pierced through his neck. Spurt! Thud! Moving backward to distance himself from the remaining black-clad individuals, Gene looked up and said, Huff, huff, 2 more to go. Just as he was about to once again attack, stumbling a couple of steps, Gene lost control of one of his legs and took a knee to the ground. Ach, damn it, not yet. Screaming, Gene cursed as he felt all the muscles in his body spasm uncontrollably. An electrifying pain coursed through his body, threatening to ruin his sanity. It was so painful that he could barely scream in pain. His body was riddled with cuts, and his clothes were dyed red in blood. But that wasn't the only reason why he was suffering so much. The muscles within his body were in even worse shape as they continuously spasmed and shook. No. Clenching his teeth and suppressing the pain coursing through his body, Gene couldn't help but be reminded of his most recent days where he trained every day. Because of how much he wanted to catch up to Kevin and Amanda, Gene increased the intensity of his workout. In the end, all of his excessive training resulted in his body becoming more fatigued and sluggish compared to when he was at his prime. Despite the fact that he consumed potions continuously, potions couldn't fully heal the micro-tears in his muscles that came from overworking himself. The only cure for that was rest. But because Gene was blinded by power, he neglected that and as such resulted in his current conditions. His every movement hurt like hell, and despite trying his best to not think about it and ignore it, the pain was slowly becoming sharper and more acute with each passing second. Staring at the two black-clad individuals who seemed to have noticed his predicament, Gene clenched his teeth. "I can't, Elos." Gathering all of the remaining mana in his body, Gene looked at the two remaining black-clad individuals and prepared to use his skill, mana conglomeration. He knew that even if he used the skill, he was destined to die. But at least he wanted them to die with him. Snorting, Gene thought back at his childhood. "You are going to be the best. Now no one can beat you. I am so proud of you. You are the pride of the Horton family." Memories of how everyone around him had been praising his talent and excellence replayed in his mind. He had grown up thinking that maybe they were right. Maybe he really was the chosen one. Maybe he was a cut above the rest and was the one that would lead humanity in the fight against demons. He remembered envisioning people erecting statues of him and worshipping him. That was what his future was destined to be. Thinking thus far, Gene couldn't help but snort. What chosen one? What prodigy? He was merely a talented individual that had all the resources available to him. In the end, the only reason why he was a step above the others was because of the top-end facilities and resources he had been provided with since young. Thinking back at it now, it probably was true. But the realization came too late. He was about to die, so what did it matter if he realized he wasn't actually as talented as he thought he was? Looking back at the two black-clad individuals, Gene stood up and took a stance. Talented or not talented? What did it matter when he was about to die? If he died, he had to at least kill the people that were after him. Crazily looking at the two black-clad individuals, Gene screamed. "Come at me, you bastards!" Swoosh! Swoosh! Heeding Jin's words, stabbing in Jin's direction, the two black-clad individuals simultaneously aimed at his head and heart. Closing his eyes, Gene gathered all of his remaining mana and prepared to unleash his skill. Click! However, before Gene could do anything, the world around him became dyed in white as the sound of two heavy objects falling could be heard. Thud! Thud! What? Slowly opening his eyes, Gene froze in shock at the sight before him. Step, step. Walking in front of Gene, the figure of a youth with jet black hair and deep blue eyes could be seen holding onto his sword. Turning around and staring at Gene with emotionless eyes, the youth coldly spoke. How pathetic! Chapter 68, The Massacre of Hallberg, 3. How pathetic! Looking back at those two emotionless eyes, Jin's mouth opened and closed a couple of times. Though he tried, no words came out from his mouth. Thud! Kneeling on the ground, Gene lowered his head and stared at his blood-soaked clothes. Those words hit him straight into the heart. No matter how much he wanted to refute, he couldn't. He couldn't even defeat a bunch of nobodies, and yet he dreamt of people erecting statues of him? How pathetic! No other words better matched how Gene felt at the moment. Expressionlessly staring at Jin's sorry figure, Rin spoke. Is this all your pride amounts to? Staring at the ground, Ren's words went from one ear to the other, the world around Jean became dyed black and white, and all sound around him became faint. Seeing Jin's state, walking next to him, Ren looked down on him. So this is the real Jean Horton, huh? An insecure brat with an overly inflated ego. That's who Jean Horton was. Only in his darkest moment did his true personality become evident. People around him thought of him as a genius and a prodigy. They lauded his talents and efforts continuously, but in the end, all that did was fuel his ego and insecurities. Just like a castle made out of cards, all it took was a simple push, and everything came crashing down. Bam! Staring at Jin's sorry figure for a couple more seconds, Ren raised his foot and kicked him in the stomach. Caw! Feeling a strong force on his abdomen, Jean curled on the ground as he gagged multiple times. To think your pride only amounted to this much, all it took was a couple of setbacks and this is the result, pathetic. Walking over to Jean, Ren grabbed him by the hair and dragged his face towards his. You disappoint me. Pa. Slapping Jean on the face once, Ren released his hair and flung him to the side as if he was a piece of garbage. I honestly couldn't care less if you died, but... Looking at Jin's pathetic figure for a couple of more seconds, Ren turned around and headed towards the exit of the room. As he left, in an almost inaudible voice, he mumbled. I didn't want to discard such an important chess piece. Watching Ren's figure leaving, leaning against the wall, Jean looked up and weakly said. Why are that guy called Rendover, right? As if he didn't hear Jin's voice, Ren kept walking towards the exit of the room. Taking Ren's silence as confirmation, bitterly smiling, Jean looked down and softly mumbled. It's you, isn't it? Who would have thought another person stronger than he had shown up? Though he didn't know the full extent of his power, he knew he killed those two black-clad individuals in a matter of seconds. It was so fast that even he, someone who specialized in speed, couldn't react. If even he couldn't react to it, didn't that mean he was stronger than him? Looking up at the ceiling of the room, Jean covered his eyes with his arm. Why is this happening to me? What did I deserve for this to happen? Yet again his pride took another dent. Just when he thought he was closer to his goal, another obstacle showed up to screw up his plan. Bang! Fiercely punching the ground, Jean screamed. Tell me why. Why is this happening to me? Hearing Jin's hysterical screams, Ren's footsteps halted. Looking back at him, he said. Why shouldn't this be happening to you? Fiercely staring at Ren, Jean glared at him and said. KH, what do you know? You wouldn't understand. Indifferently looking at Jean, Ren opened his mouth and coldly said. Why wouldn't I understand? What did you actually do to make yourself stronger? Train? Spar? Or suck onto your family's wealth and fame? What are? Before Jean could open his mouth to refute, cutting Jean off, Ren continued. Did you ever fight with your life on the line? Did you actually ever think about what the others had to sacrifice in order to get to where they were now? You keep comparing yourself to Kevin, but do you even know what he went through to get to where he is now? You're not worthy of comparing yourself to him. Every main character had their own setbacks. Kevin from a very young age fought with his life on the line. Amanda was alone for the most part of her life. Emma and Melissa too had their very own setbacks that shaped who they were now. Yet, despite all of those setbacks, they fought through it and got to where they were now. Jean? What setbacks did he ever face? With his family shielding him, Jean comfortably lived his life as a rich second-generation young master that was continuously fed the best resources. He always had an easy life with no setbacks or reality checks that helped him mature. He was merely an overgrown child with childish ambitions. What right did he have to be prideful and claim to be the best? Hearing Ren's words, Jean fiercely glared at him and shouted. Are you telling me all my effort wasn't worth crap? All the blood, sweat and tears he shed when he trained? All the days where he would sacrifice his sleep to train and become stronger, was that all useless? Without looking at Jean, Ren looked at the room. Pointing towards the black-clad individuals, he coldly said, "What does it matter if it was useful or not? In the end, you're the one that almost got killed by a bunch of nobodies." Taking a couple of seconds to look at the room, which was now a mess, Jean looked at the corpses of the black-clad individuals in the room and clenched his fist. GGGGG bullsh asterisk T. You've blabbering nonsense since coming here, what do you know? Holding his stomach, with the aid of the wall, Jean weakly stood up. You know nothing about me nor what I've been through. What I did to get to where I am. How much effort I put to get to where I was, KHH. Moving one step at a time, Jean walked in Ren's direction. How dare you come to me and talk to me as if you know anything about me? What do you know about me? The closer he got to Ren, the more powerful his voice became. Who are you to criticize me when you hide your power like a sewer rat? Tell me. Remaining silent, and ignoring Jin's words as he slowly moved closer in his direction, Ren's face remained expressionless. There was not a once of anxiety nor fear on his face, just pure indifference. Acting as if you know me. One step at a time, Jean slowly made his way towards Ren. Halt. Stopping in front of Ren, Jean looked at him straight into the eyes and shouted. You have no right to talk to me like that when you know nothing about KKHHH. Staring at Jean, who was only a few inches away from him, Ren extended his hand forward and grabbed his neck. KGHHH. Raising his body in the air, Ren coldly said. For someone who acts almighty all the time, you don't seem that impressive to me. KHHHH, let go. Suddenly being lifted in the air by Ren, Jean struggled to speak as he swung his legs in the air. It's useless. Firming his grip on Jin's neck, Ren looked at him in the eyes and spoke. When you sleep, when you eat, or when you're doing whatever you are doing, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember my hand at your throat as you heavily gasped for air and powerlessly lay in my grip. Pausing, whilst retaining his hold of Jin's neck, Ren emotionlessly looked at Jean, who kept trying to free himself from his grip. KHHH, damn it. Let go. In the end, no matter what Jean tried to do, he couldn't free himself from Ren's grip. All he could was scream and curse helplessly. KHHH. Increasing the strength of his grip to shut Jean up, Ren continued. Engrave this moment inside of your mind, realize that no one cares about that stupid pride of yours, whilst everyone around you is getting stronger, you're the only getting weaker. For your whole life, I want you to remember this moment, this humiliation, remember the moment where your pathetic self almost lost to a bunch of henchmen, remember me, Rendover beating you. The more he listened to Ren's powerful voice, the less Jean struggled. Eventually, he stopped struggling altogether. Never before had he ever felt so weak. Feeling the strong grip on his neck, Jean realized at this moment how truly weak he was. The more Ren spoke, the more Jean wanted to deny what he was saying. He wanted with all his being to release himself from his grip and beat him to a pulp. How dare you? I'll kill you. Just wait for the moment we return back to the academy, I'll ruin your life. All sorts of vengeful thoughts crossed his mind as he thought of the moment when he would free himself from his grip. As long as he got free, he would definitely. Pausing his thoughts for a second, Jean had a sudden thought. He would be able to get free, right? There was no way Ren was going to kill him, it's not like he would kill a fellow student, right? Staring back at those two emotionless eyes that seemed to be able to read through his soul, Jean shuddered. What's this? Feeling his hands shake, Jean felt an unfamiliar emotion wash over him. An emotion that not even when almost dying did he feel, fear. Looking back at those emotionless eyes, Jean felt naked. Almost as if every secret and thing about himself were laid bare before Ren's eyes to see. Trembling, Jean put his hands on Ren's forearms and pleaded. Stop. Ignoring Jin's pleas, Ren's grip on Jin's throat increased even more. Discard that pathetic pride of yours if you ever want to get revenge for today. Trying one last futile attempt to get oxygen in his system, Jin's face became blue and eventually, he passed out. Seeing Jean passing out, Ren loosened the grip of his throat. Although his actions might come back and bite him in the future, he did what needed to be done. Under the influence of a monarch's indifference, Ren cared nothing for his own feelings. It didn't matter what sort of actions this moment would cause to him in the future. In his eyes, at the moment, such small setbacks weren't something he cared for. Under the effects of a monarch's indifference, Ren viewed everything pragmatically, his every action was for his goal and his goal only. And to him, a broken chess piece was just as useless as a dead chess piece. As he spoke to Jean, Ren's every word and action was carefully thought of. Even under the effect of a monarch's indifference, Ren's memories as an author didn't disappear. Meaning that he knew Jin's character well. He knew about his insecurities and everything about him, from his pride to his circumstances. For someone as prideful as Jean, the more you insulted him, the more fuel you added to the fire. Entering Jin's room, Ren saw a broken Jean. It was as if he was looking at a dying flame, a flame that had no more fuel to burn upon. Everything Ren did at the moment was trying to reignite that flame. Only by truly humiliating him and breaking his pride into pieces could he make Jean return to normal. From the way Ren saw things, if things continued as they were, Jin's future would have been bleak. Though his actions may result in Jean hating him, Ren didn't care. What mattered to him was for Jean to return back to normal and for the story to continue as it should. He tried everything he could to fix Jean, and now, only time would tell if his efforts paid off. Click! Just as Ren was about to release his grip on Jin's throat, he heard a clicking sound from behind him. Turning his head around, towards the direction of where the sound came from, Ren saw the door slowly opening, and appearing from the other side of the door was Kevin's figure. Entering the room, Kevin froze. Looking at Jean who was being held by the neck, Kevin slowly looked at the person who was holding him. Then, his eyes met Ren's. Chapter 69, The Massacre of Hallberg, 4. Hey, why did you st? Appearing behind Kevin, Emma entered the living room, and just when she was about to speak, she stopped halfway through her sentence and gasped in shock. Following Emma, Amanda entered the room, and similarly to Emma, she gasped in shock. 3 sets of eyes all focused on one individual. Standing in the middle of the room, holding Jean by the throat, Ren's figure could be seen. Jean! Screaming, Emma took out her short swords and circulated her mana, following which a strong yellow hue started emanating from her body. Get away from Jay! Just when Emma was about to lunge at Ren, Amanda put her hand on her shoulder and stopped her. Don't! Hat! Angrily turning around, pointing towards Ren, Emma glared at Amanda and shouted. You're just gonna stand here and let him do that to Jean? What is wrong with you? Shaking her head, Amanda looked at Ren with a complicated expression. Those eyes. Those were the same eyes that he had when he killed Elijah. Though she may come across as heartless in Emma's eyes, in reality, this was all for her sake. She could still vividly remember those eyes, the same eyes that killed Elijah back in the after-party. If Emma fought against him, she stood no chance. Glancing at Kevin from the side, Amanda thought. Who is stronger? Thud. Dropping Jin's body on the ground, Ren raised his hands and said. He's still alive. Looking at Jin's passed-out figure on the ground, warily glancing in Ren's direction, Kevin spoke. What did you do to him? Looking back at Kevin, with his hands still in the air, Rin coldly said. I merely did what needed to be done. Frowning at Ren's words, Kevin looked at Rin in the eyes and said. And by that do you mean almost killing him? Shaking his head, Rin looked down at Jean. If I really wanted him dead, he'd already be dead. Following Ren's cold words, the room became quiet. Not even a pin drop could be heard as Kevin and Rin stared at each other. Emma. Breaking the silence was Kevin's voice as he glanced at Emma, who was behind him. Okay. Understanding his motive, Emma put her short swords back into her dimensional space and quickly moved to where Jin's body was. Seeing Emma move, Kevin took out his sword and pointed it in Ren's direction. Without taking his eyes off of him, he said. If you try anything funny, I won't hesitate to kill you. Indifferently glancing at Kevin, Rin didn't respond and just looked at Emma, who was slowly moving closer. Arriving before Jin's body, Emma warily glanced in Ren's direction. Looking back at Kevin, and after making sure Rin wasn't going to make any moves, she placed her finger on Jin's neck and measured his pulse. After a couple of seconds, turning around, Emma sighed in relief and said. He's still alive. Nodding his head, Kevin asked. How's his condition? Glancing back at Jean, Emma carefully looked at his body before saying. Not so good, he's heavily injured and has exhausted all of his mana. Frowning, Kevin looked at Jin's body before looking back at Ren. Now, tell us why dash. Boom. Cutting Kevin mid-sentence, just as the tension in the room was about to reach an all-time high, a loud explosion resounded across the room. The whole place shook. At? Staggering a couple of steps, Kevin, Emma, and Amanda all turned their heads in the direction of where the sound came from. Step, step, step. Appearing from the other side of the door, holding a huge axe that was about the size of two people, a black-clad individual entered the room. Behind him, a huge hole appeared on the wall as dust and debris flew everywhere. Another one. Staring at the black-clad individual, Kevin, Emma and Amanda immediately got into battle positions as they warily glanced at him. From his demeanor and aura, they instantly knew that he was different from the other people they fought before. If the others were like soldiers fighting a war, this man felt like a general that stood above his soldiers. He was definitely on a league of his own. So the boss has finally come. Looking at the black-clad individual who had entered the room, Rin instantly recognized who he was. He was the boss that Kevin and his party were supposed to fight to end the Holber arc. He was a borderline-ranked individual, and only after bitterly fighting with their life on the line did Kevin and the rest defeat him. Things couldn't have become more troublesome. Staring the black-clad individual before him, Kevin couldn't help but complain. From the people that attacked him in his room to Jean and now this. Things were starting to becoming more troublesome with each passing moment. Looking at Emma and Amanda, Kevin nodded. Nodding back, Emma took out her short swords and Amanda took out her bow. Suddenly, a red hue shrouded Kevin's sword. Slowly, the more Kevin held onto the sword, the more intense the hue around the sword became. Sneaking a glance at Kevin's imposing figure, Emma spoke. Can you tone it down a notch? Looking at Emma, Kevin smirked and said. Not a chance. Watching Kevin, Emma, and Amanda getting into fighting positions, Rin slowly backed off into the corner of the room and just stared at the black-clad individual that had entered the room. Fixing his grip on the sword, Kevin spoke. Support me. Support? Please, that's Amanda's job. Rebutting playfully, Emma winked at Amanda and dashed towards the black-clad individual. My job is to beat him. Vwam. However, as soon as Emma moved, a strong bloodlust suddenly expanded from the black-clad individual. Following the bloodlust, a humongous pressure came crashing down on everyone. A jet-black hue expanded from the black-clad individual's body and hurled towards them like a tsunami. Crossing her arms, Emma shielded herself from the pressure. Taking a few steps back, Emma looked back at Kevin and Amanda. Both their faces became extremely grim. Feeling Kevin's pressure, Emma couldn't help but look at Kevin in shock. Amanda too was shocked as her brows couldn't help but jump. You broke through? Yes, not so long ago. Bomb. Tensing his calves, the ground below Kevin cracked and his body shot like a cannon towards the black-clad individual. KHHH. Appearing in front of the black-clad individual, Kevin cut down diagonally with his sword. Clank! But right before his sword could connect with the black-clad individual, as though standing under a cascading waterfall, Kevin felt a tremendous force hitting his sword as his body was swept away. He didn't even have the chance to scream before finding himself flung in the air. Bam! Flying across the room, Kevin struck a wall. Kuwah! Spitting saliva, for a split second, Kevin lost consciousness due to the tremendous force of the impact. Kevin! Looking at Kevin, Emma and Amanda worriedly shouted. Fortunately, after a couple of seconds, Kevin managed to get up, but he didn't seem to be in a good state as blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. Hey, are you okay? Wiping off the blood in the corner of his mouth, Kevin nodded his head. I'm fine. Cool. Staring at the black-clad individual before him, Kevin's grip on the sword increased. He's strong. Solemnly looking at the black-clad individual that did not move an inch from his position since flinging Kevin away, Emma asked. How strong? At least D+ or C rank, I'm not sure. That strong? Nodding his head, Kevin held his sword with one hand as he painfully held the side of his chest. I probably fractured a couple of ribs, damn it. Gritting his teeth, Kevin looked at Amanda. Nodding her head, Amanda extended the string of her bow. Whoosh! 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 Releasing the bow, 3 arrows shot in the direction of the black-clad individual. As each arrow shot, the air split apart creating a whistling sound. At the tip of each arrow, mana was carefully concentrated to increase its destructive power. As the 3 streaks of light made their way towards the black-clad individual, Kevin looked at Emma, who looked back at him. As if they read each other's minds, they dashed towards the black-clad individual from both the left and right flank. Clank! Raising his axe, the black-clad individual blocked Amanda's arrows and hacked it towards the ground. Boom! As soon as the axe met the ground, the whole place shook. The ground split apart and debris fell everywhere. Jumping up, Kevin swung his sword towards the black-clad individual's head, whilst Emma went for his feet. Block this! Bomb! Stomping his foot on the ground below the black-clad individual's feet cracked. Kaha! Halting her movements, Emma crossed her arms and blocked the debris that was shooting towards her. Clank! Wapaya! Blocking Kevin's sword from above, the black-clad individual screamed and flung Kevin away. Crrrrrrrr. Huff, huff, damn it! Sliding across the ground, Kevin heavily panted for air. Due to his previous fights, signs of exhaustion were already starting to show on his face. Looking beside him, Kevin saw Emma in a similar situation to his. Despite the fact that the fight had only just started, they were both already too exhausted to continue. The situation was starting to become dire. Gritting her teeth and turning her attention towards the corner of the room where Ren's indifferent figure stood, Emma couldn't help but glare at him and shout. Hey, you! Why aren't you doing anything? Ignoring Emma, Ren's eyes remained fixed on the black-clad individual. Seeing Ren ignore her, just as Emma was about to curse at him, Kevin's voice stopped her. Leave him be. But... There's a much more pressing matter than worrying about him, moreover. Looking back at Ren, Kevin said. The fact that he's not interfering is much better than him attacking us from behind. Gritting her teeth, Emma nodded her head. Whoosh! Whoosh, whoosh! Once again, from behind, Amanda shot arrows, signaling for Emma and Kevin to continue. Let's go! Dashing once again towards the black-clad individual, Emma and Kevin once again tried to split their attacks. This time, Kevin aimed for his heart whilst Emma aimed for his sides. Hoo-ah! Clank! 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 Holding onto his giant axe with both hands, the black-clad individual spun around blocking Amanda's arrows. As if a cyclone had entered the room, the black-clad individual spun madly. As he spun, everything near the black-clad individual, like a magnet, started getting sucked in his direction. KHHHH. Ah! He's using a skill. Halting their steps, Emma and Kevin tried to stop their attacks, but it was to no avail as they found their body getting sucked towards the black-clad individual. Kevin, I can't hold on. Looking at Emma's struggling figure. Kevin turned back and looked back at Amanda, who kept shooting arrows like there was no tomorrow. Both of their faces were incomparably pale. It was evident that they were too fatigued. Any longer and they would no longer be able to hold one. Do I have no other choice? Gritting his teeth, Kevin hesitated for a second before activating overdrive. Activating overdrive, Kevin felt every fiber of his body exploding with energy. His muscles bulged, and his veins became more apparent. Power coursed through his body. KHHH. Gritting his teeth and enduring the pain, Kevin glared at the black-clad individual and propelled his body forward. Ha! Noticing the change in Kevin, the black-clad individual stopped spinning and confronted Kevin head-on. Clank! 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 Sword and axe matched. As they clashed, after a few seconds, Kevin and the black-clad individual had already exchanged no fewer than 300 strikes. Kevin's strikes were fluent and fast, whilst the black-clad individuals were slow and heavy. As they fought, neither budged an inch. They were currently in a complete stalemate. Cuts and bruises appeared on both bodies as they continued to clash. Blood spilt everywhere. Neither had the edge, but it was only a matter of time. Looking at Kevin, Ren knew that he wouldn't last long. The more Kevin fought, the more his veins became more prominent. His muscles twitched and spasmed with each passing second that they fought. It was evident that Kevin was suppressing tremendous pain to retain his current state. As Ren continued watching the fight like a spectator, his eyes slightly paused on Jin's body. In the novel, Jin was supposed to be fighting with Kevin, Emma, and Amanda. With his help, they managed to defeat the boss and become heroes of the academy. However, Jin was no longer here. Jin's absence was showing. Kevin, Amanda, and Emma weren't enough to fight the black-clad individual. From the way things were going, Kevin and the rest would soon die. Ren knew he had to step in. However, currently, he needed to look for an opening. He knew that with his current strength, the only thing he could do was find an opening. That's why he waited. Like a predator. Ren was waiting for the right moment to strike, and that moment had finally come. Feeling the effects of overdrive wearing out, Kevin's body suddenly gave out and was helplessly flung all the way towards the other side of the room. Bomb! Crashing against a wall, Kevin fell to the floor. KHHH. Step, step. Laying on the ground, Kevin looked up towards the black-clad individual who was heading in his direction. Arriving before Kevin, the black-clad individual raised his axe, casting a large shadow over him. Staring at the giant axe above him, Kevin couldn't help but think. Is this how I die? Whoosh! However, just as the black-clad individual's axe was about to hit Kevin, a tremendous whistling sound could be heard from behind him as a silver streak of light quickly headed in his direction. Kevin. Following Amanda's last-ditch attack, Emma appeared from behind the black-clad individual as both her daggers were dyed in a tremendous yellow hue. Die. Hoo! Noticing the tremendous power coming from the arrow and Emma's short swords, the black-clad individual screamed and a black sphere surrounded his body. Boom! An enormous explosion shook the whole room, and debris flew everywhere. After a couple of seconds, once the debris and dust cleared up, Kevin, Amanda's and Emma's figures could be seen passed out on the ground. Next to them, the black-clad individual, with the aid of the axe, stood with one knee on the ground. His clothes were all torn, and his figure was soaked in blood. No longer did he look as imposing as before. Though he was alive, he sustained heavy injuries. Hoo-wah! With the aid of his axe, the black-clad individual tried to stand up. Click! The first movement of the keiki-style, quick flash. However, before he could do so, hearing a clicking sound coming from behind him, his vision first became dyed in white before darkness overtook it. Thud! With a large thud, the black-clad individual's figure fell face-first on the ground. Appearing from behind him, holding on to his sword, Ren's indifferent figure appeared. Turning towards Kevin, Emma and Amanda who were still alive but passed out on the ground, Ren said. Thanks. Chapter 70, The Week 1. Hallberg's sky was dyed in an orange hue. The sun was coming up from the horizon, but the scene reflected by the rising sun could only be described as tragic. Agents surrounded a certain mansion, and desperate cries and echoes resounded across the space. Wee-ee-oh. Wee-ee-oh-oo. Wee-ee-oh-oo. The sound of ambulances traveling back and forth between the mansion and the hospital continuously resounded throughout the city of Hallberg. Inside of them, either corpses or wounded people were being carried. Although the situation had been taken care of by the professors who killed all of the black-clad individuals before the agents could arrive, the aftermath of the chaos still remained. Students Kevin Voss, Amanda Stern, and Emma Rochfield. We heard the story. Outside the mansion, a formal agent wearing a black suit scribbled on a piece of paper as he talked to Kevin, Amanda, and Emma. We will ask for details later, so go back and rest for now. Our agents will take care of the rest. After asking Kevin, Emma, and Amanda a couple of questions, the agent dismissed them. It was evident that with everything that was going on, he was very busy. Agents were different than heroes. Agents were people specifically selected by the central government to take care of important incidents and assess the situation. They were comprised of non-combatants. Most of them had professions that were very useful for supporting roles or administrative-type jobs. Their job was to assess the situation and seem to later communicate it back to the central government who will later dictate under which jurisdiction the incident will fall under. Either the Union or the central government, with the Union being responsible for incidents that involved demons and villains. Sir. Jean is. Hesitating, Emma looked up at the agent and asked, to which the agent replied with a short and curt reply. He's fine. Although his injuries aren't light, he should make a full recovery by the end of the week. Yes, understood. Satisfied, Emma didn't ask any more questions. Go back. We will shortly escort you to the hospital to get you guys checked. Thank you. Thanking the agent, Kevin and the rest followed another agent. As they walked, looking around, Kevin glanced at the other students. Many of them were crying and grieving. The people with whom they were happily chatting and joking the night prior had either died or were on the verge of dying. It was a truly saddening and horrific night. As he looked around, Kevin also found certain students helping out with the unexpected emergency. They were helping the agents and professors carry the corpses of their fellow classmates towards the ambulances. As they carried the corpses of their fellow classmates, the faces of the students could tell it all. Closing his eyes and turning his head away from the students, Kevin knew that this incident will forever be marked in the hearts of everyone present. No one will forget this day. Here. Arriving in front of a large tent where many students and professors were residing, Kevin couldn't help but notice how everyone looked exhausted. This was especially so for Donna, who had dark circles underneath her beautiful eyes. She must have overworked herself. Kevin thought as he, along with Emma and Amanda, found a place to sit. Despite having fought for the whole night, Donna along with Professor Novak were still trying their best to help the students. They cooperated with agents and students to try to get as many people safely out of the mansion. Not once, since the incident started, did Donna rest. This just went to show how much she cared about the students. Turning his attention away from Donna, Kevin's eyes couldn't help but drift towards a certain individual who was talking to an agent like many other students. He had jet black hair and deep blue eyes, and despite having been through the same situation as the others, differently from the others, he was in a better state than most people. Although his clothes were in a bit of a mess, he looked to be relatively unharmed. He didn't look like someone who had been through the same incident as the others. In spite of the fact that by the time they attacked he was already quite injured due to his fight with Kevin, Emma and Amanda knew their limits. Unless they were extremely lucky, there was no chance they could kill him. Their assumptions were later proven correct when they received the autopsy report regarding the black-clad individual from the agents. Though he was heavily injured, what killed him wasn't their last-ditch attack, but a clean sword cut straight into the heart. As soon as they found out this piece of news, they instantly realized that something didn't add up. The agents assumed that Kevin was the person responsible for killing the black-clad individual, but Kevin knew it wasn't him. Looking at Rin talking to the agent in the distance, two questions emerged in Kevin's mind. Who was he, and why was he hiding his strength? Waking up to the pungent smell of alcohol, covered in bandages, Jin's eyelids slowly opened. KHH. Looking up at the white ceiling illuminated by a white fluorescent light, Jin felt a throbbing sensation on his right temple, causing his face to crump up. After a couple of seconds, and after the pain passed away, trying to sit up straight, Jin suddenly felt a sharp pain coursing through his body, almost resulting in him screaming. Pumph. In the end, he could only helplessly lay down on the white hospital mattress. Once again staring at the white ceiling above him, Jin truly felt helpless. Everything felt like a blur to him. Fragmented memories of what had happened prior to waking up here appeared in his mind. The images of him almost dying and being held by the throat constantly replayed in his mind. It was only after a couple of seconds that Jin fully understood what had happened. At first, he couldn't quite place his finger onto the emotion he was feeling, but as time passed in the white hospital room, he finally could taste it. The bitter taste of defeat. Pita, pita. What's this? Touching his cheeks, Jin noticed a few droplets of water falling down from his eyes. Shh. *T. Covering his eyes with his arm, Jin clenched his teeth. How pathetic. Pride. It first started when he defeated a ranked warrior when he was 8 years old. The looks on every adult's face in the room at that time were something that he still remembered to this day. Fear, pride, awe, shock, all types of emotions were displayed on the adults' faces as he brutally beat down an up-and-coming ranked hero raised by their guild. He didn't know what was going on back then, but that day something within him changed. The looks on the adults' faces. He couldn't get enough of it. Therefore, from that day, Jin trained and trained and trained like there was no tomorrow. He was strong. He wanted people to idolize him more. He wanted them to know just how strong he was. As the days passed and he grew older, the looks on the adults' faces changed. If before they had any slight contempt, it soon disappeared. What replaced it was either fear or worship. There was no other emotion. He was getting stronger at speeds that were thought to be impossible for someone his age. Soon, he started beating ranked heroes that had been training for years without much effort.
Ah,
This feels good. Every time he beat someone, his heart would flutter. Worship me more. Fear me more. Revere me more. And along with the pleasure Gene felt whenever he would beat a strong opponent came a powerful realization. How strong he was and how weak they were. From that point on, everything suddenly started to click for him. That's right. He was special. He was the chosen one. He had something that others didn't. Talent and a good background. It was from that point on that he developed a pride that no one else had. The pride of being the best. At least that's what he thought. Laying down pathetically in the hospital bed with his body covered in bandages, Gene realized that his pride had turned into conceit. He had been deluding himself for a long time. First, it was Kevin, then it was Amanda, and just a night ago he almost died from a bunch of nobodies that were doing someone else's dirty work. His body was battered beyond belief and he couldn't even lift a finger. How pathetic. This humiliation, remember the moment where your pathetic self almost lost to a bunch of henchmen, remember me, Rendover beating you. Recalling those words, Jin's jaw clenched. However, it soon relaxed. As he recalled those emotionless eyes staring at him as if he was nothing, Gene felt an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time well from deep within him. I see, this sense of loneliness, fear, and helplessness is a first for me. They say men don't shed tears. Yet at the age of 16, Gene for the first time in a long time, cried like there was no tomorrow. He was strong yet so weak. Chapter 71, The Weak, 2. Yesterday, at around 9:45 p.m. Hallberg, a group of unidentified individuals attacked multiple students from a lock, killing 389 and crippling 107. Sitting on a comfy chair inside of a private hospital, I looked at the large TV screen on the wall. Currently, a male news anchor was reporting the happenings of the Hallberg accident. Next to him, a pretty female anchor added a few comments here and there. According to the investigation, no valuable information was gathered regarding the aggressors as they all killed themselves or died from unknown causes. According to reports, thanks to the support of hero rank 156 Donna Longburn and S-ranked hero Connor Novak, the number of casualties didn't reach the 4-digit figures. This type of massacre on students had never happened before in the history of the lock nor humanity. What happened yesterday will forever be remembered as the massacre of Hallberg, and we can only extend our support and prayers towards the victims of this accident. Stacking the papers on the table, looking towards the camera, the news anchor's voice deepened. Now this gives rise to a new question. Is the lock really that safe of a place? Is the lock really the safe haven advertised by the central government and the union? Who should be held accountable for the death of those 389 people? I'm not sure about you, but... Clack! Bam! As I was listening, suddenly the TV shut off. Following which the sound of something hard smashing against the cold hard floor echoed across the hospital. Turning my line of sight towards where the sound came from, angrily standing up, a professor glared at what remained of the controller. Looking back at the TV, he shouted. What sort of nonsense are you talking about? Do they expect us to protect all of the students when we too were fighting for our lives? Do they not understand what we went through that night?
Ha!
Tell me. Professor Rim, please calm down. Professor Rim. Noticing the outburst, a couple of students and professors immediately headed towards the professor, trying their best to calm him down. Despite their struggle, the professor didn't calm down. It was only after more professors and students came that he finally stopped going on a rampage and calmed down. Tensions were at an all-time high. Not just the students, but the professors were heavily affected by the incident. Despite the fact that the professors had gone through a lot of similar situations, that didn't mean they too didn't feel terrible for what had happened. Be it students or professors. They all thought one thing. What if I was stronger? Could an extra life had been saved? Looking at the commotion, I shook my head. There were no what-ifs in the world. What had happened had already happened. You either looked ahead or remained stuck in the past. Glancing at the students that sat next to me, their eyes were hollow. It was evident that they were traumatized by the incident. I sort of understood what they were going through. Having lost my parents at the peak of my dependence, I knew the feeling of losing loved ones. Some lost their best friends, some lost their romantic partners, or some even lost their siblings. Almost everyone lost something yesterday. As I stared at the students next to me, an indescribable sense of guilt welled up from within me. I had already mentally prepared myself for this outcome, but every moment I stayed in the hospital felt agonizing. The desperate cries of the parents of the deceased students rang throughout the whole hospital, tearing a piece of my heart along with it. It felt suffocating. Almost as if I was crammed inside of a small room with barely any oxygen to breathe. Only after turning the volume of my MP3 to the max did I manage to calm myself down. Phoo. Taking a long breath, I stood up and decided to head out to get some fresh air. The longer I stayed in this place, the worse I felt. I needed to get my mind off of things. Perhaps the best place is the rooftop. A quiet place with no one to disturb me. The rooftop was the perfect place to clear my mind. In a secluded space inside of the hospital, Donna was going through the records of the recent incident. Because of her reputation as a ranked hero, she managed to gain access to all of the footage of the cameras installed on the first floor. The video she was currently watching was filmed by a camera that recorded the hall for rooms 500 to 599. Naturally, it contained the battle between the students and the black-clad individuals. Though she was a bit hesitant, knowing she could get in trouble if found out, having gone through most of the reports handed in by the students, a certain report piqued at her curiosity. The last hit wasn't mine. That's what Kevin wrote on his report. The autopsy report from the agents on the ranked black-clad whom was found next to Kevin and the rest showed that the individual was killed by a sword strike straight to the heart. Donna knew that apart from Kevin, there was no one else in that room that could use a sword. Emma used short swords. Amanda used a bow, and Jean used daggers. If the last hit wasn't his, then whose was it? After doing a bit more digging, Donna managed to get a hold of the autopsy report of the other black-clad individuals found inside of the room where Kevin and the rest were found. In total there were 6 black-clad individuals found in that room. Apart from the ranked one, the remaining 5 were all ranked. A stark contrast to the other one. However, what caught her attention wasn't their ranks. No. It was the conditions of the bodies. 2 of the 3 black-clad individuals were found without their heads. Moreover, once again, they died due to a clean sword cut. This was a drastic difference compared to the other 3 which were without a doubt killed by a dagger due to the depth of the cut as well as the size of each stab. Matching the timing with the footage, Donna knew that inside of the room at that time Kevin and the rest had still not gone to aid Jean. Meaning that there was an external factor in play. This student. Indeed, after looking at more footage, there was a student who caught her attention. From head to toe, he was ordinary in every way. Inside the video, the man in question was not doing anything out of the ordinary. When the black-clad individuals appeared, he was nowhere to be seen. It was as though he had disappeared. If not for the fact that she had been actively looking for him, she would have assumed he had died along with the many other students that night. What happened next was even more mysterious. Suddenly at 9:58 p.m., turning around the corner to the 500 to 599 corridor, he appeared. Whenever he walked, black-clad individuals would mysteriously fall. Because of the chaos, if someone didn't look carefully, they wouldn't have noticed this small detail. It was so subtle that no one around him realized what had happened. Even after zooming the camera and slowing the video down, Donna couldn't find out what was happening. The more Donna looked, the more she was confused. Something didn't add up. As she zoomed the camera towards his face, his demeanor in general didn't add up. It wasn't something a student should have. That emotionless and indifferent attitude was only something top heroes that had gone through many similar ordeals had. What happened next was even more confusing. He entered room 575. The exact room where Jean was staying as well as where Kevin and the rest entered afterward. Fast-forwarding the clip, Donna saw Kevin, Emma, and Amanda sweeping through the rest of the black-clad individuals in the hall. Following which they soon too entered room 575. The same room the man in question had entered. A couple of minutes after they entered, Donna saw the last black-clad individual making his way towards the same room they entered. Using his power, he broke through room 575, creating a massive hole in the wall. After that, though she couldn't see what was going on, she could hear the sound of metal clashing against each other followed by loud screams. 10 minutes after the black-clad individual entered the room, a large explosion shook the room where subsequently, a minute after the explosion, a brilliant white light dyed the surroundings. Because of the light, the camera froze up for a solid minute. By the time the screen came back to normal, everything was quiet and no one came out from that room. After thinking for a bit, Donna figured that during that minute where the camera froze, the student in question left the scene. Taking out her tablet and after matching his face with her database, she immediately found the identity of the student in question. Ren Dover. She did have a small recollection of him. It was during the first day of training. He had left an impression on her that day. Not a good one. She had placed him on her blacklist that day thinking that he wasn't worth having expectations for. Of course, although she placed him on her blacklist, that didn't mean she gave up on teaching him. She only gave up on having expectations of him. But after watching the footage, maybe she needed to re-evaluate her previous opinion of him. Ring. 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 Just as Donna's curiosity was increasing, her phone suddenly rang. Frowning, she took it out and answered the call. Listening to the call, her posture instantly straightened. Nodding her head multiple times, she politely said, "Yes, yes, yes, I will be there immediately." Tack. Hanging up the phone, Donna quickly got her stuff and rushed towards the entrance of the hospital. Why out of all times did they have to come now? Officials from the union had arrived. Clank. Closing the door behind her, only the video Donna was watching was left to play in the emptied room. Standing on the rooftop of the hospital, I took a long breath and looked at Hallberg. The sky was blue and the sun brightly lit the city. No signs of what had happened the night prior were evident, and apart from the occasional ambulances moving to and fro in the city, it seems like the chaos had died down. Everyone was just going about their day almost as if nothing had happened yesterday. Maybe it was better this way. As I was looking at Hallberg from the rooftop, I couldn't help but look back at the incident. Especially what had happened while I was under the effects of a monarch's indifference. I thought about this before, but monarch's indifference was an extremely scary skill. I didn't think too much about it before, but under the influence of a monarch's indifference, it felt as if my body was being controlled by someone other than me. It felt as if I was under the depths of the sea and my body was moving on its own. Despite the fact that I knew what I was doing, the process and how I was doing things was beyond my control. It was like anything aside from my goal didn't matter. Regardless of what I did to achieve the goal, it didn't matter. Be it sacrificing lives or killing. As long as it helped me achieve the goal, it was enough. That's how it felt. Scary. Very scary. Especially since my actions may have resulted in Jean and the others forming a negative opinion of me. Either way, regardless of how I wanted things to have played out, it was too late for me to regret it. You can't change the choice you made, all you can do is not let it ruin you. This quote perfectly described how I felt at the moment. I could only move forward and go along with the changes around me. Clank! Suddenly, as I was in deep thought, the sound of the rooftop door opening echoed across the rooftop. Turning around, my eyes soon paused on a black-hair red-eyed youth.
Ah.
Seriously? Chapter 72, The Week, 3. An awkward silence enveloped the rooftop. Apart from the occasional chirps from the birds flying in the sky, no other sound resounded across the space. Step, step, step. Arriving on the edge of the rooftop, standing next to me, Kevin placed his hands on the handrails and looked at Hallberg in the distance. Aside from the occasional ambulance squeals coming from below, the city of Hallberg looked calm and peaceful. As Kevin and I watched the city in silence, a strange yet relaxing atmosphere enveloped us. It was as if all of our worries were gone for a split second. For a short period of time, neither of us spoke. We just calmly watched the city below us. It's peaceful, isn't it? After a short pause, breaking the silence, whilst looking at the city below him, Kevin opened his mouth. It sure is. Nodding my head whilst keeping my eyes on the city below, I responded. From where I stood I could see children and adults playing in the park across the hospital. People walking along the roads to get to work, and cars honking at each other. It really was peaceful. Thanks. Once again breaking the silence, Kevin thanked me. Closing my eyes, I didn't respond immediately. I didn't know how to respond. If I answered, wasn't I just basically confirming to Kevin that I was indeed the one that had killed the black-clad individual? But... sure. In the end, those were the words that came out of my mouth. Glancing at Kevin from the side, I had come to the realization that denying was pointless. Having created Kevin myself, I knew that he wasn't a brain-dead protagonist. No matter how much I tried to deny it, he had already figured out what had happened. What was the point of denying something that was already obvious? Hearing my reply, whilst still looking at the city in the distance, Kevin smiled. You know, you seem like a completely different person compared to yesterday. Pausing, Kevin briefly glanced at me before leaning back on the handrail and once again looking back at the city. You look more human. Taken aback for a second, recalling what had happened the night prior, bitterly smiling, I responded. Well, the circumstances forced me to be that way. Circumstances, huh? Repeating the word a few times, Kevin's brows knit for a few seconds before relaxing. Glancing at me from the side he said. Were they the same circumstances that caused you to attack Jean? Bitterly shaking my head whilst gazing at the clouds in the sky, I smiled. Would you believe me if I told you it was for his own benefit? Tilting his head, Kevin thought for a moment before nodding. More or less. Surprised, I turned my head in Kevin's direction. What made you agree with what I said? I wouldn't have believed you if it was before, but having just come back from visiting Jean, I along with the others managed to notice a change in him. I don't know what you did, but Jean has become a lot easier to talk to. Though he still is somewhat arrogant, it isn't as bad as it was before. Moreover, the way he looked at me was different. Placing his finger on his chin, Kevin thought for a bit before saying. If before there was a hint of hostility, right now it's completely gone. It's as if he is a new person. At least that's how I feel when I look at him now. Listening to Kevin speak, I was honestly quite surprised. It seems like what I did under the effects of monarch indifference paid off. It was a gamble. A risky one at that, but I'm glad Gene managed to somewhat pick himself back up. Though I don't know whether he still hated me for what I did, as long as he was back to normal, that was all that mattered to me. Similar to Kevin, with me being the author, I knew Jin's personality the best. I knew that even after what I had done to him, he wouldn't target my family. With the pride he had, he would never attack someone else's family. For someone like him, if he resorted to such a method, he had already lost. Perhaps, this was why I went extra harsh on him once I was under the effects of monarch indifference. But I wasn't sure. If I repeated what I did to someone else that wasn't Gene, I could only imagine the consequences of my action. Just imaging it sent shivers down my spine. Once again, my apprehension towards monarch indifference grew. I quickly needed to adjust my mentality. Seeing me fall into deep thought, Kevin hesitated for a bit before saying something that had been bugging his mind since yesterday. "Why are you hiding your skills?" Hearing Kevin's voice, I snapped out of my thoughts. Processing his question for a couple of seconds, I shook my head and looked at him with a trace of pity in my eyes. "You should know the answer better than anyone else." Leaning backward on the handrail, Kevin thought for a moment before breaking into a light chuckle. "I guess you're right, it was stupid of me to ask." Smiling, I took a better look at Kevin. One thing I noticed as I looked at Kevin was that under his eyes were thick dark circles. Thinking for a bit, since he used overdrive, I figured he was probably exhausted. Though the skill was very strong, its side effects were just as strong as the skill was. From the way Kevin looked, it seems like he still needed a couple of days of rest before being able to recover fully. Well, that's my cue. After looking at the city below for a couple of more minutes, I closed my eyes and decided to leave. Although it wasn't long, my talk with Kevin managed to somehow calm me down. Without saying anything, Kevin nodded. Basking under the sunlight, he was already lost in his own world. I couldn't blame him though. With what had happened, I'm sure he was blaming himself a lot. That's just who he was. Letting out a long sigh, just as I was about to leave, thinking for a bit, I looked at Kevin and solemnly said, "Before I leave, let me tell you something important." "What?" Seeing how solemn my voice was, Kevin snapped out of his thoughts and his ears perked up. Glancing left and right to make sure no one was looking, I looked at Kevin straight in the eye and said, "Makeup remover serves as a great women repeller."
Bye.
Clank. Closing the door behind me, I leisurely walked down the stairs. After a short pause, Kevin's laughter echoed throughout the rooftop. It was so loud that I could even hear it all the way down to where I was. Shaking my head, I too smiled. Although he was trying his best not to show it, I knew that he was currently under immense pressure. Differently from me, however, his guilt stemmed from the fact of how weak and helpless he felt as he watching his fellow classmates die before his eyes. In spite of him feeling a different kind of guilt compared to me, I sort of sympathized with how he was feeling. Hopefully, my little joke helped him take his mind off of things for a bit. Shaking my head one more time, I headed downstairs back to the hospital lobby. It's tough being the main protagonist. Welcome. Arriving at the entrance of the hospital, Donna brightly smiled. Standing in front of the hospital entrance, a muscular male with a clean-shaven head and sunglasses indifferently glanced at his surroundings. His demeanor was cold and his expression didn't change even after Donna came. Slightly nodding his head towards Donna, the muscular man's face remained aloof. Smiling slightly in response, Donna looked around to see if there was someone else. According to the call she received, there were 2 important figures coming today. Donna. And just when she was about to look for the other person, it was at that moment that a charming voice and scent flowed towards Donna. Just by hearing the voice, Donna could instantly tell who it was. "It's good to see you again, Monica." Peeking from behind the muscular man, a young girl with dark orange hair came out. Surrounded by a bright aura, Monica happily smiled in Donna's direction. She had crystal clear blue eyes and measured up to 160 centimeters in height. Contrary to Donna's seductive beauty, her beauty leaned more towards the innocent side. "How long has it been since we've seen each other?" "I'd say half a year." "That's actually shorter than I thought." "Well, with how busy you usually are, it'd be a surprise if half a year felt short." Exaggerately sighing, Monica looked at Donna with envy. "Maybe I should have gone to teach at the lock with you." Smiling, Donna shook her head. "Your fault for choosing money over happiness. I'm starting to really regret my decision now." Looking at the girl before her, Donna couldn't help but think back at her past. She along with Monica graduated from the lock. However, differently from her, Monica chose to join the union instead of teaching at the lock. At that time their powers were about the same, but 5 years later, thanks to all of the support she got from the union, she was now ranked 27 in the hero ranking. She was nicknamed the Sunset Witch. Her powers were so devastating that the union had placed heavy emphasis on her. They had high hopes for her. Due to how outstanding she had been in recent years, they all thought that she was going to be the next SS-ranked hero. That's how outstanding she was. "Monica, stop chatting, and let's get our jobs over with." Disrupting their conversation, the tall muscular man spoke. "Geez, why are you always so uptight with everything, George?" Ignoring Monica, the tall muscular man named George glanced at Donna. He was hinting at her to hurry up. "How about you first come into the hospital instead of waiting at the entrance?" Taking the hint, looking around her, Donna noticed that the atmosphere around them was tense. Almost suffocating. This was partly due to how enormous their presences were. Although they weren't consciously releasing it, it was still felt by everyone around them. "This way." Without skipping a beat, gesturing for them to follow her, Donna walked towards a more secluded space in the hospital. "Alrighty." Happily smiling, Monica and George followed Donna. Only after they left that everything returned to its usual calm. Arriving at a more luxurious space inside of the hospital, Donna brought them into a private room. Gesturing for them to sit down anywhere, Donna took off her coat and sat on a sofa. "So what do I owe you the pleasure of coming here for?" Glancing at George for a second, Monica raised 2 fingers. "We have 2 objectives to achieve. One is to deliver a certain equipment to the agents, 2, see a certain student." Hearing the first part of her sentence, Donna nodded. Naturally, in order to accurately measure if demons and villains were involved in the incident, special equipment was required. If not, it would be much harder to determine whether this was done by a villain or someone else. However, after hearing the second half of Monica's sentence, Donna frowned. "Who is the student you got your interest in?" "Kevin Voss." "Kevin?" "Yes." Hearing Kevin's name being mentioned, Donna's frown deepened. "What do you need to see him for?" Cutting Monica before she could answer, George spoke. "It's none of your business." "Oh." "I would like to disagree since he is my student." Raising her brow, Donna looked at George and released her S-ranked pressure. "Humph." Not wanting to be outdone, George too released his pressure. Instantly the room shook. "Hey, both of you calm down." Noticing that the situation was quickly getting out of control, Monica stepped in. Whoosh. Instantly both of their pressure disappeared as a more monstrous one enveloped the both of them. KHH. KHHH, Monica, stop, I get it. Enveloped by such monstrous pressure, both Gurge and Donna felt as if a truck had rammed into them. They could barely move their bodies. Seeing that they had both calmed down, Monica's pressure disappeared. Phew, you know I don't like doing this sort of stuff. Flicking her hair to the side, Monica leaned back on her chair. Looking back at Donna, she said, "It's nothing worrisome, we just wanted to have a nice chat with him." Helplessly sighing, Donna looked at Monica with a complicated expression before saying, "You aren't thinking of recruiting him, right? If so, discard that thought immediately. He still needs to graduate from the lock before he is allowed to step foot into the Union. We know, we aren't here to recruit him, but more like observe him." Seeing the slight hostility in Donna's eyes, Monica reassured her. Lightly tapping on the armrest of the chair, Monica looked at the ceiling of the room before softly mumbling, "We also have a couple of other people in mind, but they might be harder to recruit since their parents might want them in their guild." Pretending to not have heard the latter half of her sentence, Donna nodded. "If you promise me you won't be doing anything out of order, I can allow you to meet him." "Thank you, Donna, you're the best." Happily standing up, Monica jumped in Donna's direction. "Stop, don't come near me."